He filed for divorce behind my back. He thought I had no idea. He thought he was in control. But what he didn't know was that I had already won. You're watching Family Feud file. Subscribe now. Because this is where patience becomes power and silence becomes the deadliest weapon. My name is Aurora Hayes, and for 14 years, I believed I knew my husband completely. We weren't perfect, but I trusted the life we built together. We shared laughter, small routines, plans for the future, and a home filled with memories. Or so I thought. Until that morning, when a single envelope on the kitchen counter shattered everything I thought I knew. It wasn't a fight, a phone call, or a suspicious conversation that tipped me off. It was a piece of mail. A thick, official-looking envelope from a law firm I had never heard of. At first, I assumed it was a mistake. But then I saw his name, written in bold letters at the top, and my hands went cold. The envelope carried divorce papers, filed weeks ago. In secret, without a single word to me. Sitting at the table, I opened the envelope carefully, not wanting to tear the documents. Each page described actions taken behind my back, asset divisions, timelines, legal strategies. It was calculated, cold, and precise. My husband had mapped out a future where I had no say, no knowledge, no voice, a future in which he believed he had already won. I remember the sinking feeling in my stomach as I reread every line, hoping some mistake would appear. There was none. He had thought of everything. The house, the accounts, even the smallest details. Like which of our friends and relatives would hear about it first. And he had assumed I would be blind, ignorant, and passive, that I wouldn't notice the trail he left for me to find. When he arrived home that evening, he kissed me as he always did, asked about my day, and spoke casually about mundane things. I watched him closely, noticing the calmness in his face, the calmness of a man who believed he controlled the narrative. I didn't confront him, not yet. I didn't cry or scream. I sat silently, observing every word, every gesture, every small action that revealed how confident he was in my supposed ignorance. Over the next few days, I studied him. Every phone call, every late night, every secretive glance. He assumed his deception was perfect. But he left patterns, subtle hints of movements, accounts, and statements that contradicted each other. While he was meticulous in his planning, he was careless in underestimating me. That was the first lesson I learned. People reveal themselves when they believe they are invisible. I decided not to confront him. Silence became my weapon. While he thought I was blind, I was building a mental map of everything he had done, cataloging evidence, remembering details, and preparing for a strategy that would turn the tables completely. Every lie he thought he was shielding himself with was another layer of his undoing, one I would use when the time was right. That night, as I lay awake listening to his steady breathing, I realized something important. Winning doesn't always look dramatic. Sometimes it's quiet, deliberate, and unnoticed. My husband had filed for divorce thinking he had won the first battle. But he had underestimated the one thing he couldn't control. Me. I didn't feel victorious yet. But I felt a spark, a realization that I wasn't just going to fight back. I was going to plan. Every move he made, every secret he kept, would become a part of my strategy. And when the time came, he wouldn't just regret underestimating me. He would realize that he had walked straight into a trap he didn't even see coming. The envelope was more than paper. It was a challenge. And I intended to answer it with patience, precision, and power. The hardest decision wasn't discovering the divorce. The hardest part was pretending I didn't know. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to confront him immediately, to throw the papers on the table, to demand an explanation for 14 years of life being erased behind my back. But instinct is emotional, and emotion is dangerous in a battle where strategy wins. I had to let him believe I was unaware. I had to let him continue thinking that he controlled the narrative. My patience was my weapon, and the longer I stayed quiet, the more confident he became and the more mistakes he made. Over the next several days, he maintained the same casual demeanor he always had. He came home, kissed me on the cheek, asked about my day, and spoke about his meetings. Every word, every gesture, every unguarded glance I observed carefully. I documented mentally, noting contradictions, inconsistencies, and secrets. Each tiny revelation added to my growing understanding of his plan and his blind spots. One evening, while he was distracted on the phone, I noticed a small detail that seemed insignificant at first. A paper left carelessly on the counter. It was a statement, partially visible, showing a transfer he had made without my knowledge. It wasn't a large sum, but the timing was suspicious. My mind immediately cataloged it. Patterns began to emerge. I realized he had been trying to hide more than I could see at first glance. I didn't say a word. I didn't act. I let him continue thinking he was in control. That night, I reviewed every document, every transaction, every email. I cross-referenced accounts, timelines, and receipts. Slowly, methodically, I built a map of his secrets. And as I traced the pattern, a single thought consumed me: he had underestimated me. And that was his first mistake. He began revealing more without realizing it. Casual mentions of accounts, offhand comments about financial decisions, complaints about legal fees. Everything that escaped his lips became evidence in my mind. And I stored it carefully. Not as vengeance yet, but as preparation, because patience and observation are more powerful than confrontation, when used correctly. When he finally asked, "Do you understand what's happening?" I replied calmly, "Yes." That single word relaxed him completely. He believed he had won the psychological battle. Little did he know that his belief in my ignorance was the key to his downfall. At home, our interactions changed subtly. He was more cautious, more careful. Every decision, every movement, was measured. And in those moments of control, he unknowingly created opportunities for me. He was teaching me the moves I would use against him. Then I reached out to a lawyer he had never expected, not the one he knew, not the one he assumed I would use. This lawyer was meticulous, quiet, and precise. I brought every document, every note, every detail I had gathered. I didn't accuse. I presented facts, patterns, proof. Her reaction was minimal but significant. "He's already made mistakes," she said, and those words resonated. Because I knew what they meant, the next phase of the silent war had begun. It wasn't about argument or confrontation anymore. It was about exposure. In the following weeks, he began making errors that I had predicted. He forgot small details, left accounts unreported, and assumed I hadn't noticed. And every time he did, I added to my arsenal. I remained calm, collected, always observing, always waiting. My silence had become a mirror reflecting his mistakes. Then came the first formal step. I filed for discovery requests under the postnuptial clause he had long forgotten. This legal move forced him to reveal what he had tried to hide. The first documents returned incomplete, inconsistent, and alarming even to his own lawyers. His confidence was cracking. That night, he approached me again, attempting small talk. "I think this is getting complicated," he said, trying to gauge my reaction. I smiled calmly, sipping my tea. "I prefer clarity," I replied. Those two words conveyed more power than anger or confrontation ever could. He left that night uneasy, restless, knowing he had underestimated me at every step. And I knew the next phase was approaching, the phase where patience, documentation, and strategy would finally pay off. He thought he had covered every angle. He thought I wouldn't find a single paper. But one forgotten document changed everything. Years ago, during the early days of our marriage, I had been cautious about finances. Young, ambitious, but inexperienced, I listened to our financial advisor, who insisted on protective paperwork. My husband, confident and charming, laughed at the formality. He signed the documents without reading them thoroughly, trusting that our future would be straightforward and honest. That document, a simple postnuptial agreement, contained clauses he never thought would matter. Clauses requiring full financial disclosure in the event of divorce. Clauses he would later try to ignore. When my attorney asked whether any postnuptial agreements existed, I didn't respond immediately. I went home and opened an old, neatly organized folder I hadn't touched in years. There it was, tucked between tax filings and past statements, the original postnuptial agreement. His signature, unmistakable, and the clauses clear. That document didn't scream confrontation, but it carried a silent, powerful authority. I studied it carefully. Each word was a weapon. Each requirement a leverage point. I realized that hiding assets, no matter how clever, wasn't just unethical, it was legally risky. My husband had overestimated his ability to control both me and the legal system. And now, his own signature became the tool I would use to dismantle his confidence. The next time he attempted to speak about the divorce at home, I let him think I was calm, oblivious, and naive. I nodded as he tried to explain his plans, his rationale, and the fair division he envisioned. Every word he spoke reinforced his belief that I didn't know about the document, about the financial discrepancies, or about his intentional omissions. While he basked in his perceived control, I quietly contacted my attorney. I presented the postnuptial agreement, alongside the evidence I had been collecting since discovering the first envelope. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse. I simply laid out facts, timelines, and proof. My lawyer, calm and meticulous, examined the documents and then looked at me. "He's already made mistakes," she said. And those words sank deep. I felt a strange mix of anticipation and satisfaction. This was the turning point. The phase where patience and observation would pay off. Every careless remark he had made, every oversight, every transaction he had assumed I wouldn't notice, they all suddenly mattered. And with the postnuptial agreement in my arsenal, I had legal teeth that could not be ignored. Over the next week, I observed him even more closely. He was relaxed at home, speaking freely, unaware of the storm brewing behind his ignorance. During casual conversations, he revealed small details, accounts I wasn't supposed to know about, minor transfers, and inconsistencies in timelines. These details, innocuous in his mind, became pieces of the puzzle I was assembling. Then came the court filing. A simple request for full financial disclosure, referencing the postnuptial agreement, was sent through formal channels. My husband, confident and unbothered, assumed it would be routine. He didn't account for the meticulous preparation that had preceded it. The documents he had filed or disclosed were now cross-checked against evidence he had unknowingly left in plain sight. The moment he realized the postnuptial agreement could expose discrepancies, subtle panic began to appear. He was cautious, overcompensating in conversations, attempting to reconstruct timelines, and explaining away omissions, but it was too late. Each explanation I documented mentally and relayed to my attorney. At home, his demeanor shifted. He tried to engage in normal conversation, but I noticed the tightness in his jaw, the fleeting hesitation in his speech. The man who had believed he was untouchable was slowly unraveling. Confidence, once his ally, had become a trap. One evening, I noticed him checking accounts late at night, muttering under his breath. He logged into a financial platform he had sworn I didn't know existed. That action was timestamped, recorded, and noted, a tangible example of recklessness under pressure. I didn't confront him. I didn't react. I allowed him to continue revealing himself, as every action contributed to the story I was building for the court. By now, the quiet war had escalated. The postnuptial agreement was no longer a forgotten piece of paper. It was the foundation of my strategy. Every inconsistency he created, every oversight, was strengthened by the legal framework that he had signed years ago. His mistakes were my leverage. His confidence was my map. And the more he believed he controlled the narrative, the faster he walked into the consequences of his own underestimation. That night, as I sat alone reviewing documents and notes, I realized a truth: patience is a weapon far stronger than anger. Quiet observation, paired with legal precision, can dismantle even the most confident adversary. He didn't yet know how carefully I had prepared. He didn't yet know that the document he had once dismissed casually would become the instrument of his undoing. The envelope had started this journey. The postnuptial agreement had escalated it. And now, every detail he assumed was hidden would come into the light. He believed he was several steps ahead. He had no idea that in reality, every step he had taken brought him closer to the trap I had set. Patiently and deliberately, he walked into court with his usual smirk. He thought the game was his. But the moment the documents were presented, everything changed. The courtroom was sterile and intimidating, a space where words weighed more than actions, and every glance could carry consequences. My husband entered first, his posture confident, his expression calm. He had rehearsed every statement, memorized every explanation, and believed he had covered every possible loophole. I followed, quietly, with no visible emotion. Each step I took, I measured. Each breath I drew, I controlled. I didn't need to display anger, disbelief, or fear. I only needed to exist as the quiet, collected force that would unravel him piece by piece. The judge called the session to order. My husband's lawyer began by laying out their case, explaining the divorce, the division of assets, and portraying my husband as cooperative, reasonable, and transparent. Confidence radiated from them both. But I knew the cracks were already forming. When it was my attorney's turn, she rose with calm authority. She didn't raise her voice, she didn't accuse. She presented the postnuptial agreement first, sliding the document across the table. The room seemed to hold its breath. The judge picked up the paper, scanned it, and paused a moment longer than expected. He didn't react immediately, but subtle changes betrayed him. His jaw tightened, his hands fidgeted slightly, and his eyes flickered toward me. He realized, perhaps for the first time, that I had anticipated every move. He hadn't accounted for the power of preparation, patience, and observation. My attorney then began presenting a timeline of inconsistencies, late-night transfers, unreported accounts, and patterns that contradicted his sworn statements. She didn't embellish. She didn't speculate. She presented facts, evidence, and logic. Each statement added pressure, and I could feel my husband's calm veneer cracking with every revelation. The judge leaned forward, scrutinizing the evidence, and asked precise questions. Not many, but sufficient to expose gaps in his explanations. Questions about dates, amounts, and transfers left my husband fumbling, each response weaker than the last. Confidence, which had been his greatest weapon, was disintegrating. Outside of the courtroom, my husband attempted to regain composure. He whispered to his lawyer, adjusted his tie nervously, and forced a smile that didn't reach his eyes. He believed he could salvage control. But every move I had anticipated, every reaction I had prepared for, rendered his attempts futile. Later that day, when he confronted me at home with casual conversation, he tried to probe my awareness. "Do you understand the situation?" he asked, his tone neutral but cautious. I smiled lightly and replied, "Yes, I do." Those two words unsettled him more than anger or accusation ever could. He realized that my silence had never been ignorance, it had been strategy. Over the following days, the tension grew. My husband became increasingly restless, defensive, and careless. He attempted explanations, backtracked on statements, and even revealed accounts he hadn't yet disclosed. Each error was recorded, noted, and sent to my attorney, who continued building a meticulous case against him. The courtroom engagement continued with follow-up hearings. Each time he spoke, his confidence eroded further. Patterns became impossible to hide. Accounts, transfers, and statements that he thought were hidden became irrefutable evidence. He wasn't just losing control of the divorce process, he was losing credibility, trust, and composure. By the end of one particularly tense session, the judge issued instructions requiring complete financial disclosure, and warned that any omissions would be treated as intentional deception. Those words hung in the air like a storm ready to break. My husband left the courtroom subdued, pale, and restless. The man who had once believed he was untouchable had finally realized the magnitude of underestimating me. That night, he tried once more to negotiate, speaking cautiously, attempting small gestures of reconciliation, subtle attempts to regain trust. But I remained calm, collected, and measured. Every interaction was now a mirror reflecting his mistakes, and every move he made only reinforced the evidence I had meticulously gathered. I walked through the empty house that night, each room echoing the memories of what once was. The air felt charged with quiet power. Victory wasn't celebratory yet, but the trajectory was unmistakable. Every plan, every document, every observation had led to this moment, the moment where patience, strategy, and precision began to dismantle his confidence and control. The silent war had escalated to the public stage. Every misstep he made was now visible, tangible, and irreversible. The envelope, the documents, the hidden accounts, all of it had converged into a carefully orchestrated exposure. And yet, the endgame was not complete. The postnuptial agreement had shifted the battlefield. But the final moves were still to come. My husband, desperate and cornered, was about to make decisions that would determine the ultimate outcome, decisions that would either save him or accelerate his undoing. By the time the next court date approached, my husband was no longer confident. He wasn't calm. He wasn't strategic. He was afraid, and fear makes people sloppy. I saw it in the way he avoided eye contact, in how his voice cracked when he tried to sound normal, and in the way his routine completely collapsed. He had spent years believing control was his birthright. He controlled the finances, the narrative, and even the silence in our marriage. But now, the silence belonged to me, and it was suffocating him. It started with a phone call I wasn't supposed to overhear. He had stepped outside, pacing the driveway, his voice low but urgent. I caught fragments of the conversation, words like, "Move it, temporary," and "before the hearing." He didn't know I had already installed a voice-activated recorder weeks earlier, not because I suspected him, but because I trusted my instincts more than his words. That night, after he fell asleep, I accessed the shared laptop he assumed I never used. He had forgotten to log out of an encrypted email account, a careless mistake, fueled by exhaustion and panic. What I found wasn't just evidence. It was a confession. There were messages between him and a financial consultant discussing asset transfers, offshore holding structures, and ways to delay disclosure. One message stood out painfully clear. "She doesn't know about the last account. If we move it now, it's safe." I didn't cry. I didn't shake. I took screenshots, backed them up to 3 separate drives, and forwarded them to my attorney with a single line, "This is the mistake." From that moment on, the power dynamic shifted completely. I wasn't reacting anymore, I was directing. This wasn't just another legal proceeding, this was the moment where every careful observation, every piece of evidence, every subtle detail I had collected over weeks would converge into a reality. My husband could no longer manipulate. He entered with that practiced calm, but I noticed the subtle cracks. His hand trembled slightly as he adjusted his tie. He kept glancing at his phone, reading emails that confirmed the audit was imminent. Confidence, which had been his shield, now seemed fragile, like glass threatening to shatter with the slightest pressure. The forensic auditor began methodically, meticulously, cross-referencing all accounts, transactions, and statements. He asked precise questions, And for each answer my husband provided, another inconsistency appeared. Every transfer he thought was hidden. Every account he assumed I didn't know about. Every minor discrepancy, all of it surfaced. And it wasn't speculation. It was proof. I watched silently, observing not just the audit, but his reactions. Panic was rising like a tide he could not control. He tried to explain, justify, even charm his way out of it, but the auditor's focus was unwavering. Facts don't bend for charm, confidence, or manipulation. Facts are final. Then came the moment that shifted everything irreversibly. A small account, dormant for years, surfaced. It had been opened in another state, disguised under a corporate entity he believed I couldn't trace. But I had anticipated it. Months earlier, I had gathered documents linking the account to him directly. My attorney presented it calmly, providing a paper trail that connected every transaction to his name, his signature, and the exact dates. The courtroom gasped. My husband froze. His lawyer whispered urgently, trying to mitigate the damage. But the connections were airtight. He had assumed oversight. He had assumed I lacked the patience, foresight, and intelligence to find the gaps he left behind. And now, every assumption he made was unraveling. I could feel the shift in energy. Where confidence had existed, panic took root. Where control had existed, uncertainty now dominated. And I didn't need to say a word. I didn't need to react. Observation was my weapon, and the truth was my army. Outside the courtroom, my husband tried to negotiate privately with his attorney, sending messages attempting to explain, to justify, to delay. But every action, every word, only added weight to the case. Every defensive maneuver he made became evidence of intent, of mismanagement, of deliberate concealment. Meanwhile, I was compiling my own records, cross-referencing auditor findings with the timeline of his actions. Every late-night transaction, every hidden account, every forgotten document, it all formed a complete picture. And the irony was profound. The man who had filed for divorce behind my back had unknowingly prepared the proof that would secure my victory. One afternoon, as the audit reached its peak,